And welcome to this episode of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. Well, how are you today? I hope you're doing well, taking a little bit of time for yourself. And you know what? Today we're going to be discussing how not all income is actually income. Now, I know that this might sound like a little bit of a strange title, but trust you me, this is something that we all have to be attentive to. You know, we have some very exciting and sometimes some very scary times going on right now. We are going in a million different directions, it seems, and things are happening politically, things are happening economically, things are happening within the market. And some of these things may be very exciting to you. Some of these things may be very alarming. But as we live life, we have to remain very diligent and staying focused on what matters. We have to remain very conscientious about what we're doing from the retirement savings standpoint. And it's even more important once we get to retirement because, as I've said so many times in this radio show, the math changes when you get to the distribution stage of your life. This is something that no longer is the safe and easy saving process or part of your life. This is now the distribution stage of your life. This is where you're taking and you're distributing everything that you've worked so hard to save over the course of the last 25, 30 or more working years. And so we have to do this and we have to do it right. We have to stay focused and very purposeful. Now, if you're just joining us, if this is the first time, maybe you're stopping by and listening to this radio show or watching this podcast, I just want to say a warm welcome to you. I encourage you, if you have a question, if you're curious about a certain financial topic, something that you think would be relevant to all of us as pre-retirees or retirees, listeners, those that are curious about retirement and retirement planning and investing, I encourage you, go to our website, johnsonwim.com, where you can post questions. Who knows, you might get lucky. You might go ahead and put your question on this radio show. I also encourage you, go to that website and do a little bit of exploration. This is something where we have a tremendous amount of resource. There's white papers written on different topics that are financially relevant, things to help you with your financial literacy. And then there's also our just backlog of videos from YouTube. And this is something where you can either watch these videos through our website or you can go directly to YouTube to the Capitalized Life and Retirement channel where you can watch previous recorded videos about various topics and things that may be of interest to you. If you're a reader, you can also pick up a copy of my book, The Capitalized Retirement, and that's available at any major book reseller. So how is it that not all income is actually created as income? Isn't it possible that income is just income? Well, the reality is that we already know we have at least a couple of different varieties of income. We know that we have something that all of us have been engaged in, at least at some point in our life, that is considered earned income. And earned income is one of those things where, obviously we hope to make as much earned income as we possibly can. We know that every dollar that we earn, we end up having to give some of that away in the form of income tax as just a part of life. And then we know that once we get into retirement specifically, our income is likely going to be changing. Now, we may not entirely stop working when we retire. Many people today have found that retirement or fully retiring is just not for them. They're still active, they're still healthy, they want to stay sharp, they want to be able to contribute to society and make money. And so even though they're quote unquote retired, maybe from their previous occupation, their previous employer, they're continuing to make the choice to work and make earned income. But by and large, most people, once they have retired or even semi-retired, they are now starting to develop and get into a different stage or a different type of income that we would typically call passive income. Now, passive income is a variety of different income. Passive income could be something like a pension. If you work for an employer, if you're lucky enough to have a pension, that pension is going to provide you, Lord willing, an income every single month for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. You could live until you're 110. As long as you're alive, that pension, as long as it is well funded and well managed by that corporation or that pension custodian, is going to continue to distribute income to you for the rest of your life. And there's even provisions within most pensions that if you pass away and you are survived by a spouse, well, that spouse can take over and accept the same payments that you were receiving as long as you elected to have that settlement option done for yourself and for your spouse. Now, another form of passive income is going to be Social Security. Now, Social Security is one of those things where I shouldn't even have to say it, but I still have to. The Social Security is not an insignificant thing. Social Security for most individuals is going to make anywhere from 30 to 40% or more of your income stream when you retire. And the difference between potentially the first best choice for claiming Social Security and maybe the second best choice of you claiming Social Security could amount to $100,000 or $200,000 or more dollars over the course of your lifetime. I know it doesn't seem that way, but the reality is that this is the reason why math is so very vital to you and to me. You see, the reason I rely upon math and calculations as a financial advisor and a fiduciary, and I don't rely upon hypotheticals, and I don't rely upon, the possibilities, but really looking at life expectancy, and I'm looking at real hard numbers and what happens if a person, lives maybe 7 or 8 years and passes away versus if a person lives 20 or 25 years. Well, that math shows us which selection, which option is probably going to be most ideal. Now, does this mean that every single person, even the people that spend the time to do the calculation, to do the research, figuring out which pension or Social Security election is going to be the best for them, that they win every single time? And the answer is absolutely not. There is no magic bullet. There is no magic formula. Tell me when you're going to pass away, and I'll tell you exactly what kind of life insurance to buy. I'll tell you exactly when to claim for Social Security and which pension election is going to be the very best for you. There's just simply no perfect way about it. But we do what we can. And you see, with something as important as a passive income from Social Security, something that's going to last the rest of your life, if you have never gotten engaged, if you've never really involved yourself in knowing exactly what your Social Security is worth, what it's going to distribute to you, then I encourage you, stop looking for the statement to come in the mail. Because chances are, with everything, all the changes that have taken place within the system of Social Security, especially this year in 2025, it's very, very likely that Social Security is no longer going to be putting out as many of those paper statements as what they used to. The emphasis for Social Security and so many other governmental departments to go paperless and to communicate more so via email and online. This is a big push. And so as a result, you can simply go on to the website, ssa.gov. You can create your own account, and you can get a copy of your own statement. You can look over the income. You can look over all of the years of history of earnings report showing what you've made and making certain that that looks accurate to you. Because if there is any inaccuracies, if there is any mistakes, those are things that you want to fix before you actually need to begin drawing the Social Security benefit. Now, we've established that pensions are passive. We've established that Social Security is a passive income, and that's different than an earned income. What's another form of income that could be similar to pensions and Social Security? Well, another one is going to be rental income. This seems to be an ever-present and ever-increasing interest in so many different retired clients. Clients that potentially have found that with a couple of properties, they really don't use that second property. And so instead of taking and leaving it dormant and leaving it by itself with no one there, they've found that it can be a money-making opportunity. They can rent it out. They can turn it into an Airbnb or a Vrbo, something to provide a little bit of income to them. Rental income certainly has some positives. It's an income stream that if you have things like long-term lease agreements, it could be an ongoing, consistent income stream for you. If it's something that's more or less like a B&B, something that may require a little bit more input, a little bit of overhead, a little bit of upkeep, well, that income may be fluctuating a little bit more than, say, something like Social Security or a rental. But the reality is, it's still going to be considered to be a passive income. And we can't talk about rent without also including things like farm rent. If you have, say, farm ground and you're getting to the stage where you really simply do not want to continue to work that ground, you obviously have the opportunity of being able to rent it. Now, is there some drawbacks? Well, there could be, because you see, anytime we are not directly involved in that farming operation, we may not get all the tax deductions that we used to have. Once we go to a more passive income stream, where we're now renting the farm out, it's being cared for by the tenant, it's being planted and harvested by that tenant, well, we're pretty much now out of deductions. We can certainly do certain things like improvements and put in tiling and things of that nature. And trust me, I'm no CPA, so I don't want to give an extensive, exhaustive list. But the reality is that you just simply don't get the tax deductibility, nor do you get the risk. So there's always a pro and there's always a con. Now, there's one other income source that we want to discuss just before this break, and that is interest and dividend income. Income that is considered real income. Income that is a passive income. It's an income you don't have to work for. It's an income that is a byproduct of how you're investing. And I want you to just imagine before the break, what would it be like if you're retired and you have an income check that you can rely upon with consistency every single month, knowing that it doesn't come at the expense of your principal. Now, if that sounds intriguing, I encourage you, stick around as we come back. We're going to be discussing how not every retiree knows about real income. Sit tight. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the second half of the Capitalized Life and Retirement Show. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson, president and owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income source located in Clear Lake and Humboldt, Iowa, serving clients in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. If you're just joining us, welcome to today's program. Today we've entitled our program, When Income Really Isn't Income. And that can sound very confusing to a person, I suppose, but when we think about the word income, it can be varied. It can be very confusing. You see, income comes typically in two forms: in earned income form, which is, well, most all of us are familiar with that. We're working and we are providing a service, and in return for our labor, we're getting paid. And out of those wages, we save for retirement, we pay our income tax, and we use part of that money to pay for things like health insurance. However, as we get closer and closer to retirement, we begin to transition our mind to be thinking about what kind of income we're going to have when we retire. You see, when you retire, your success in retirement, your happiness gauge is not what you're worth. There's many, many people in the world today who are worth a lot on a piece of paper, and yet they don't have any income to spend. And certainly you don't want to work until the day that you die. So you're now focusing on making that transition from the accumulation stage of your life to the distribution stage of your life, but you're also changing the kind of income that you're going to be living on. You're going to be shifting from earned income to now passive income. Now, passive income, if you are just joining us, if you weren't around for the first half, we talked about a few different varieties. We discussed how pension income is a passive income. You don't work for that. That's something you get for the rest of your life, assuming there's no defaults. You get Social Security income. Again, that's a passive income. You did all of the work early on so as to get a check for the rest of your life. There's things like rental income. This could be income from farm ground that you own that you're just renting out, or it could be something as simple as a piece of real estate or an apartment that you no longer need. And so you're renting it and you're getting that passive income. But let's be real. Most people, they have Social Security. They don't have pensions. Most people don't have properties to rent. And so really their income in retirement is basically narrowed down to two different forms. It's that Social Security and it's the investment income. Now, why is it that income really isn't always income? This is a very important component, and it's something that I would suggest is so important that a person, regardless of your age, really should never lose sight of. You see, most of the financial services industry has conditioned you to believe the growth is what you need to focus your money on. That's what you need to focus your efforts on. And you know what? I'm in 100% agreement with that. When you are younger and you're definitely in the stage of your life where you know you've got many, many years before you retire, you have to be focused on growth. You cannot play small. You do not want to play small. You want to be aggressive because the reality is you have the security of a paycheck. But as you get closer and closer to retirement, I would argue that there's two things you want. Number one, you want to have less risk. You know that if, say, you're within 2 to 3 years of retirement and all of a sudden something breaks loose in the market, we've been feeling this feeling now for a while that the market continues to go to higher highs. It keeps going to world record highs, new levels literally every single week, breaking new records. We all know, or at least we should know, that that's not going to last forever. At some point, we've witnessed it before, right? We've seen where those pullbacks can take place in a twinkling of an eye. And as a result, think about what that could do to your retirement. Think about what would happen if you're, say, a year or two, maybe even you're on the precipice of retirement, and all of a sudden, over the course of the next year or 2 or 3, you lose 20, 30, 40, or 50% of your retirement. What would that do? For most, that would jeopardize, that would completely almost eliminate the possibility of being able to retire. Because it was those dollars that you had worked so hard to save that you were reliant upon. And so I would argue as we get closer to retirement, we don't want the same amount of risk. It doesn't mean we can't afford to take risk. It just means we don't want to take on as much risk because we don't have the time to make it back if we lose. What's the second thing? Well, I think that the second thing that we all desire is freedom. And you see, freedom to do what we want to do, to go where we want to go. Freedom is created by, number one, not working. Freedom is created by having enough income. The freedom to have options, the freedom to do the things that we want to do is something that I believe every retiree really craves. And you see, when we have an abundance of money, when we've worked hard, we've been diligent to save, we want to be able to keep those dollars safe. We want to keep those dollars intact, but we don't want those dollars to be untouchable. We want those dollars to be available. We want those dollars to be providing for us the byproduct of income so that we can have the freedom to do what we want to do. And you see, despite the fact that the financial services industry has given us correct coaching, it's given us correct directive to invest for growth. The reality is that they forget to tell us, okay, but when you get to retirement, when you get to the distribution stage of your life, this is how we turn this money that you work so hard to into income. And you see, for many of the custodians, many of the quote-unquote financial products that we can invest in, for many of the financial advisors that exist within the financial planning world, their idea of you getting income is by making one fatal, flawed error. Now, this is just my opinion. You can ask 50 different advisors, and who knows, maybe you would get 50 different answers. But most financial advisors are trained to condition you to simply take all the assets that you own and begin to liquidate them. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, remember that if, let's say I had a farm, let's say I had 100 acres of farm ground, there's going to be two numbers that are in my life. The first number is going to be the value of that farm ground. That's the intrinsic value. That's what my farm is worth. And let's just say for simple math that my ground is worth $15,000 an acre. Okay? Now, we also have a second number. The second number is going to be one of two things. It's either going to be the rent that my farm ground is producing for me, or it's going to be the value or the exchange price or the money that I'm able to get from selling the grain that every acre that I own produces. Now, I want you to think about this. If you were that farmer, if you were that property owner, you owned that farm, you had that 100 acres. If I was the very best salesman in the world, could I ever convince you to sell an acre of your farm ground every single month to pay your bills? Now, the answer probably is no. Not to say that you have $15,000 worth of bills every month, but you get my point. It would be silly. It would be absolutely foolhardy to sell an acre of your farm ground every single month to pay your bills. Why is that? Because eventually, Matthew, I'd be out of dirt. And isn't that true? So what maybe is a smarter way to be able to have the income? Well, no doubt the smarter way is to either rent the farm to get the farm income via rent check every single month or year, or it's to work the farm and to get grain and to sell the grain and to get income. Now, I know that this is an oversimplification. We're not focusing on farming, but you get the point. You see, today, most financial advisors are still using the same old tools to provide growth. They're still putting money into mutual funds. And although there's many varieties of mutual funds, by and large, at the end of the day, well, if we have money in a mutual fund and we want to get money out, what do we have to do? Well, we have to sell shares. And you see, during a moment like now, when the market is up, when things are optimistic, when things seem really on fire and things are going so well and we keep hitting these new highs, guess what? It's exciting. No one's thinking about, having to sell a few shares here and there to get income. But folks, I've got nearly 3 decades of experience to warn you that it is not acceptable to be selling your principal to get income. Don't take the bait. Don't accept their philosophy of income in the distribution stage of your life, the most vulnerable years that you have. You see, that's like the farmer selling an acre of his farm ground every single month and crossing his toes and his fingers to make certain, to hope that he's not going to live long enough to see the end of those acres. You see, we're betting, we're playing chicken with the stock market right now when we're in the market. And again, I'm not risk adverse. I want clients to have some degree of exposure to risk because it's okay to have some risk and it's okay to focus on appreciation. But not without first safeguarding all of the principal that you've worked so hard to save. You see, that principal is an income-producing machine if it's invested properly, if it's invested contractually for income, so that you can make that consistent and that steady 4 and 5 and 6 and 7% every single year on that principal. And there's varying degrees of risk and there's varying degrees of safety. But the reality is that taking and selling your own principal and then trying to call that income, well, my friends, that's not income at all. That's not real income. That's you fooling yourself into thinking that what that custodian, what that company is sending you is really income. Maybe you feel as though things are getting a little out of control. And if so, I encourage you, reach out for help. Contact a fiduciary, develop a relationship, and get focused on what truly matters, making certain that your principal is safe and that you're producing the income you want for retirement. I'm Matthew Johnson. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And remember, it's up to you to make today a great day.